This is section 1.5, part 1. Our goal is to bisect segments and angles. And we're going to start with the midpoint of a segment. A midpoint is the point in the middle. It's the point in the center of a segment that divides it into two equal or congruent parts. There is only one midpoint per segment. There can only be one point that's in the exact middle of the segment. When we bisect a figure, it's to cut it into two equal parts. The prefix bi means two, so we're cutting it into two equal or congruent parts. Our bisector of a segment could be a line that comes through the center, another segment, a ray, or a plane, and it intersects the segment at that midpoint, at the point exactly in the center. We're going to look at two kinds of midpoint formulas, just like we had two distance formulas. The midpoint between 2 points on a number line. So for example, number 1, between the point 4 and 14, if we wanted to know what the point right in the center is, we could do the average. So our midpoint formula at the top says you add the two numbers, a plus b. Once you've added those, then you divide by 2. And be very careful putting this into your calculator, that you will need parentheses around those top numbers before you divide by 2. Or you need to add them and hit enter, then divide by 2. If you do not hit enter or include the parentheses, your calculator will do order of operations and will give you an incorrect answer. So if we add 4 plus 14 and then divide by 2, 4 plus 14 is 18, divided by 2 is 9. So 9 is the midpoint, the point in the exact center between 4 and 14. 9 is 5 spaces away from 4. It is also 5 spaces away from 14. It's equidistant between the 2 points. Example 2, the midpoint of -4 and 8. -4 plus 8 is positive 4, divided by 2 is 2. So 2 is the midpoint. 2 is 6 spaces away from the -4, and it's 6 spaces away from positive 8. So we know that's the correct answer. The midpoint between -4 and 7, so -4 plus 7 is positive 3. Divided by 2, you could leave it 3 over 2, or you could put 1 and 1/2, or you could put 1.5. It is okay to get decimals and fractions for midpoints as long as they're halves and 0.5. You can also have positive or negative answers for midpoint depending on where you are on the number line. Our second midpoint formula, just like our second distance formula, is on a coordinate plane. It's the midpoint of 2 points on a graph. To do this, it's the same concept as the average. You're adding two items and then dividing by 2. We're going to find the midpoint of the x values, so x plus x divided by 2, the midpoint of the y values, and that xy will give us a point that's the midpoint between the two coordinates. So for example 1, point A is at 4, 7. Point B is at 8, 15. We're going to add the x's. X's are always the first numbers, 4 plus 8, all over 2. And we're going to add the y's. Y's are always the second number, 7 plus 15 divided by 2. Be sure you are adding the tops before you divide. 4 plus 8 is 12. The 7 plus 15 for the y's is 22. 12 divided by 2 is 6. 22 divided by 2 is 11. So if you plotted the point 4, 7, and 8, 15, and then the point 6, 11, it would be the midpoint between the other two. It would be exactly in the center between 4, 7, and 8, 15. We're going to continue using this midpoint formula. Be sure you've written it down. It will not appear on the next two slides. Example 2, we want the midpoint between -3, 7 and the point 9, -1. Again, we're going to add the x's and divide by 2, add the y's and divide by 2. We're finding an average. When you find an average, however many items you add up on top, you divide by that number. Our x values are -3 and 9. Our y values are 7 and -1. -3 plus 9 is 6. 7 plus -1 is 6. And 6 divided by 2 is 3. So the point 3, would be the midpoint between negative 3, 7 and 9, negative 1. Again, your directions for this would say find the midpoint. We want the midpoint, the point in the exact center of the 2 points negative 6, negative 2, and negative 11, 3. We're going to add the x's, negative 6 plus negative 11. Once we do that, we'll divide by 2. And we're going to add the y's, negative 2 and 3. Once we add those, we'll divide by 2. Negative 6 plus negative 11 is negative 17 because we get plus a negative. Negative 2 plus 3 is 1. And you can leave your answer in this form, negative 17 over 2, 1/2. Or you could change it to negative 8 and 1/2, 1/2. Or you could change it to negative 8.5 and 0.5. Either one of these answers is absolutely correct. Remember, midpoints can have halves and 0.5s. They could be positive or they could be negative. So that formula is useful to find the point exactly in the center of 2 other points on your graph. We're going to take this formula where you add the x's, divide by 2, add the y's, and divide by 2. And we're also going to ask you to work some backwards. Now, the point we're finding is the midpoint. We'll call that point M. And the 2 points we got the x's and y's from in the formula were A and B. Instead of giving you the 2 points to plug in the x's and y's and solve for M, this time I'm going to give you point A is at 1, 7, and at that halfway point the answer is 412. So I'm just going to plug in what I know. I know the midpoint M is 412. That's an x value and a y value. And that to get that, what we've done is we've added the x's divided by 2, added the y's divided by 2. Now I know my first x value is 1 from point A, but I don't know the second one, so I'm going to put the letter x. I know the first y value is 7 from point A, but I don't know the y value for point B, so I'm going to put the letter y. We're going to take this problem, we're going to break it into 2 parts. When we add our x's and divide by 2, that gives us our x value from our midpoint. So I know that I get 4 when I do 1 plus x divided by 2. And we're going to solve this equation. We're going to solve for x. The first thing I want to do is get rid of divided by 2. Anytime I'm dividing by something, I can undo it by multiplying by that number. So we're going to multiply by 2. But if I multiply by 2 on the right, I also need to multiply by 2 on the left. So we get that 8 equals, these always cancel. It will not affect the top, so we still have 1 plus x. And to solve for x, we're going to subtract 1, so x is 7. We're going to do the same thing with the y's. To get the 12 in the y value of the midpoint of our answer, we did 7 plus y, and we divide it by 2. So 12 is what happens when we do 7 plus y divided by 2. And we're going to solve for y. So we're going to multiply by 2. 2 times 12 is 24. Again, multiplying by 2 only cancels the bottom. It does not change the top at all. We have 7 plus y. If we subtract 7 to get y by itself, we get that y is 17. This is our x and our y that we would need to put with point A17 to get this midpoint 412. So all of your answers will be written as coordinates. They will be written as points. Our x was 7 and our y is 17. So we're setting up the problem without knowing our second endpoint, our x, y, but knowing what the answer, our midpoint, will be, and then we're taking it apart. Okay, let's try another one. Remember that the m is your midpoint. This is your answer. So we got this answer 2, 5 by taking our first x value, our 9, adding it to an x value we needed to find, and divide by 2. We got the second part, the y part, the 5, by taking the 3, our y value for point A, adding a y we need to find, and divide by 2. I'm just going to take the first part of each and set them equal. So 2 is what happens when we do 9 plus x divided by 2. And the second part of each and set them equal. 5 is what happens when we do 3 plus y and divide it by 2. I'm going to solve the equation on the left first. We always want to clear the fraction, so multiply by 2. So we have 4 equals, these 2's on the right always just cancel, so we have 9 plus x, it does not change the top. This is a positive 9, so we're going to subtract 9, x is negative 5. Same thing with the y's, we're going to multiply by 2 to clear the bottom. 2 times 5 is 10, equals, the top does not change, it's 3 plus y. To get y by itself, we're going to eliminate the 3. This is a positive 3, so we subtract it from both sides, and y is 7. So my other endpoint, my point B, is negative 5, 7. If I put this with the 9, 3 and do the midpoint formula, my answer is M, the 0.25. Let's try another example. My answer, negative 3, 5. That's the midpoint. That's what you get when you solve this midpoint formula. On top of the first one, this is the x part of the coordinates. We're going to use our x's, 6, and some x we need to find. The second one is the y part, so we're going to use our y, 8, and some y we need to find. Remember your endpoints, the x and y that you're actually plugging into the formula, the one that's missing and the one we have, are always points A and B. Your answer that you put by itself, in this case negative 3, negative 5, is point M. That's the midpoint. So again, negative 3 is the answer we got from the x part, from doing 6 plus x divided by 2. Negative 5 is the answer we got from the y part, from 8 plus y divided by 2. Then as you solve these equations, you must clear fractions first. So we're going to multiply both sides by 2. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. On the right, it always just cancels the bottom. It does not change the top. To get x by itself, we need to get rid of this 6. So we're going to subtract 6 because it's positive. Negative 6 minus 6 is like plus a negative. So that's going to give us negative 12. To solve the y equation on the right, we're going to start out the same way. Multiply by 2. 2 times negative 5 is negative 10. Remember, it cancels the bottom. The top stays the same. To get y by itself, we need to move the 8. It's positive, so we're going to subtract 8. Negative 10 minus 8 is like plus a negative 8. That's going to give us negative 18. So our xy that we would have to put with 6, 8 to have a midpoint of negative 3, negative 5 is negative 12, negative 18. All of your answers for midpoint should be written as points. They're an x value and a y value. Okay, so 2 formulas, midpoint between 2 points on a number line, and the midpoint between 2 points on a graph. We'll also use that backwards. Talking a little more about bisectors, we also have an angle bisector. And if we're going to bisect an angle, the bisector must be a ray. It's going to start at the vertex and go through the center of the graph. It divides the angle into 2 adjacent, so 2 angles that are next to each other and share a side, congruent angles. And since these 2 small angles are congruent, we can put an arc on the first one and an arc on the second one. And that shows that those 2 angles are the same measure. If we had a double arc on each, then that would also show that they're the same measure. So if ray OB, this ray in the center, bisects angle AOC, the large angle, then it's going right through the center. And we know that the measure of angle AOB, this one, is equal to the measure of angle BOC, the second one. And we need to use the equal sign because we're talking about how many degrees are in each angle. We're talking about the measure. Let's do some examples with this. Again, same picture. OB is bisecting angle AOC. We know the 2 angle measures are equal. This one tells us at the bottom that the measure of angle AOB is this one on the left, is 42. Then it's asking for the measure, how many degrees is angle BOC? Well, if this is the bisector in the center, then these 2 angles should be congruent and have the same measure, so they're both 42. Same picture. Ray OB in the center is bisecting the large angle AOC, So the two small angles, angle AOB and angle BOC, have equal measures. This one tells us that the measure of angle AOB, measure because it's how many degrees it is 37. And it's asking us for the measure of angle AOC. AOC is the entire angle, so we need to consider the fact that if AOB is 37, BOC is also 37. So the entire angle is 37 plus 37, or 37 times 2, which is 74 degrees. Remember, you need to either include your degree symbol every time or not include your degree symbol every time, but be really, really consistent with it. So if your degree symbol looks like a 0, I'll know that you're a person who does or does not use that degree symbol consistently. Number 3, same picture. If ray OB bisects angle AOC, then the measure of angle AOB equals the measure of angle BOC. They're going to give us a measure to start with. The measure of angle AOC, whole large angle is 87. And again, in your book, they'll do one large arc across and tell you that the entire thing is 87 degrees. They're asking for the measure of angle COA, so I'm going to trace that in red, COA. That's just the large angle written with the letters in the other direction, so it's also 87 degrees. The next example includes some algebra, and we're going to do our work on the next slide. We're given the same picture. Ray OB bisects angle AOC. Then the measure of angle AOB, the small angle on the left, is equal to the measure of angle BOC, the small angle on the right. This one tells us that AOB right here, is 3A plus 8. And the measure of angle BOC is 5A minus 12. Since the ray bisects, it cuts this angle into two congruent parts, and even if they don't look congruent on the picture, we've been told that it's a bisector, so these two halves are equal. You're just going to take the expressions, the 3A plus 8 and the 5A minus 12, and set those equal. So 3A plus 8 equals 5A minus 12, and we'll solve the equation. I'm going to get all my A's to one side, and the 3 is smaller, so I'm going to subtract the 3A from both sides, so also from the 5A, so that I get a positive A value. So 8 equals 2A minus 12. All of my A's are on the right, so I need to move my numbers to the left. To get rid of minus 12, I'm going to add 12 to both sides. 20 equals 2A. And when we divide by 2, we find that A is 10. We're going to go back to our original problem because we found that A is 10. One thing you need to remember is the problems involving algebra, you always need to plug back in. So we found that A is 10. Now this time, they didn't ask us to plug back in. On a test, for example, I might ask you for the measure of angle AOB. So you would have to plug the 10 back in for A and tell me that it's 38 degrees. The book most of the time will ask you to solve for the variable. The homework we'll work on in class tomorrow, we'll go back over the midpoint and midpoint backwards, make sure those make sense. Then we'll be working on page 38 through 40. 4 through 13 is all. 18 to 32 is evens. 37 to 42, 44 to 49, and those last two are all. See you tomorrow.